Welcome to the Mobile Workforce Podcast, where we sit down and have real conversations with business leaders that have been where you are. During these interviews, we'll dive into what it takes to improve systems and champion processes that maximize performance. Each week, our trailblazing guests share their experiences and understanding of the workforce to help inspire change, challenge our thinking, and share what it takes to successfully travel the road to profitability. Now here's our host, co-founder and chief evangelist of About Time and WorkMax, Mike Merrill. Hello and welcome to the Mobile Workforce Podcast. I am your host, Mike Merrill, and today we are sitting down with my friend, Kipp Sorensen, who is the Director of Collaboration and Content Management, and soon to be the Chief People Officer at Journey Team. Journey Team is an award-winning Microsoft Gold Certified partner that specializes in all three Microsoft clouds, including Modern Workplace, Modern Azure, and also Microsoft Business Application. So in today's episode, Kipp and I are going to talk about data and its design and also organization and what healthy relationships between those data points look like. So thanks for joining us on the show today, Kipp. Excited to have you.
Dude, it's great. And I love the, my friend, although we may have never met in person, so we're just friends on the internet, which just sounds weird.
It's a modern time, buddy. These are new friendships, right?
Yeah, you call it whatever you want, but it's awkward. Yeah.
Well, so now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about. Actually, before we get to the data thing, I just got to say, I mean, I've been a longtime listener of several of the podcasts that you've been on historically and that you help co-host and lots of interesting things. But one of the most interesting factoids that I know about Kipp is I see that there's a rumor you might have started that you're actually a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So what can you tell us about that? Is that a true rumor or what's the story there?
It's a true rumor. However, anyone that has their black belt in Jiu-Jitsu, you would prefer people not to know that you have a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. The joke is that it's just a darker target for all the other people to want to try to destroy you. So, and there's way too much pressure that comes with that title, but someone somewhere thought I deserved it, and thus I have it. But I'd much rather be probably a purple or a blue belt if I had my way.
Nice. Well, that's pretty awesome. I do know, that's probably the hardest belt in all the martial arts to earn. I mean, you don't trip and fall and,
No.
earn a black belt in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, it's been 14 years since I've been training. And, if you want to insult anyone that does jiu-jitsu and they say, oh, I'm a black belt, you responding with, oh, my son, Timmy, he's a black belt in karate. And you making those seem like they're the same thing is the ultimate way to insult me. So they're not the same. No, not at all. In fact, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you can't even get a blue belt until you're an adult.
Wow.
And that's like belt number 2 on the adult level, right? And so it's one of those martial arts. It's not, there's no hiding. Let's say, and one of my favorite analogies is, and I'm not making this up. This is reality. I could train with anybody, and if they didn't have a belt on and we rolled, I would tell you what their belt was when we were done. There's no hiding behind some pads and like pretty technique. When you're grappling with someone, you know where their knowledge is, you know how good they are. And there's all kinds of other things you learn about people. If they're a passive aggressive personality, if they have anger problems, all those things actually show up in regards to how you train. It's super insightful, such an amazing martial art.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, congratulations on that achievement.
Yeah,
Because again,
let's train sometime.
Yeah, sounds good. I might need a slice of humble pie. So I think that's the best way to get one.
14 years later, I'm still getting humbled. Even today, I just got my butt kicked a handful of times. So it doesn't stop.
That's awesome. Well, so and the reason I bring it up, it's not just because it is very interesting, which it is, but also how instructive has that journey been in your journey with Journey Team and the business and how you look at the world? Because I've got to imagine it probably crosses both directions where jiu-jitsu helps form how you look at the world here, but also the way you look at the world has also helped form how you've approached your training in jiu-jitsu.
Without a doubt. I haven't told anyone of this. I've started writing a book around those principles between jujitsu and life. And I'm not joking. We could spend 8 hours having this conversation, but the most obvious is, intent. And I think that's probably the biggest lesson, right? Like most people when they start jujitsu, let's throw out some statistics really quick. There's roughly only about 5,000 black belts in Brazilian jiu-jitsu in the world.
Wow.
Okay. 80% of people who start jiu-jitsu, only 20% continue. Out of that 20% that continue, only about 1% of them actually get their black belt. So this isn't a martial art that people like sign up and then they succeed. This is a martial art where most people sign up and they quit. And they quit is because back to our conversation earlier before we hit record, they don't want to check their ego. Because like I said, there is no hiding. So if you don't know what you're doing, you will be humbled over and over and over and over again until you slowly start learning, period. And I think in society, we think, and that's the key here, because I think it is a lie, but I think in society, we think we can kind of go around and smoke and mirrors and have our stuff together and be a valuable contributor to the company and not be quote unquote found out. And people know that's the lie, because most people know if you're a good contributor on the team or not. You're the only one believing the lie. But in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you're forced with the lie. And I think that's why most people quit, because they're unwilling to maintain some humility to grow effectively. And that's really the lesson of jiu-jitsu. Even in those early days, it was about, I want to get a black belt. It didn't take long for it to be, no, it's not about a black belt. It's about how I show up today. It's about learning the battle that is placed before me today and learning today. And that's it. And being present in the moment and focus on incremental growth. And that's the same approach that we need to take continually in our jobs, right? Is how do I improve what I'm doing, check my ego so I'm willing to be humble enough to admit what I don't know and learn. And being able to be open to new things, right? And learn new things. And so that way I can progress.
Wow, that's well stated. So, I mean, a lot to unpack there, but I guess steering it back towards the conversation that we're planning on having today, jujitsu, data. What's the correlation there between your jujitsu doesn't lie, your training, and data?
Yeah, and if you don't mind me adding a little context, data in the element of what we see as consultants, right? And so I want to make actually one distinction for all the tech guys, because we're going to get beat up, Mike, by a bunch of people if we don't make this distinction. So we're talking knowledge primarily. Now, is knowledge a form of data? It certainly is. What we're not talking about is normalized databases sitting in SQL and Oracle, right? So what we're talking about is data or knowledge within your organization, okay? Now, those correlations, man, I mean, how's this? This is one of my favorite distinctions about jiu-jitsu. So one of our top black belts, a guy that I may have only caught like once or twice. And I'm like hesitant to even say that right now because he might hear this and then I'm going to be on his hit list and then he'll just destroy me for the next, 6 months. So, and in jiu-jitsu, we submit each other, right? It's grappling with chokes and hyperextending bones. And I tap really fast so no one breaks my arm, right? Like that's kind of the game that we're playing, okay? And one of the most dangerous guys at our gym is about 145 pounds. I'm about 200. I am stronger than he is. I am longer than he is, so I can maintain better distance than him. And he might be just a little bit faster just because he's a tad younger. So what is it that allows him to dominate in a grappling match with me? Knowledge. And that's what technique is, right? Technique was an outward expression of his knowledge. That's it. And that's why jiu-jitsu is such like this superhuman power. That's why it's so great from a self-defense perspective, because I don't have to be a world-class college athlete to defend myself in a fight. I actually can just use my brain. And that's why you see so many of these young kids, kind of nerdier kids, get into jiu-jitsu, and they blossom because it requires knowledge and the acting of that knowledge to be amazing. And isn't that ironic that our organizations are exactly the same exact way? In fact, on this, and hopefully I don't mess up the quote, but one of my favorite quotes on the subject, actually, I do have it here because I wanted to bring this up. It was a former CEO of HP. His name was Louis Platt. And he was quoted by saying, if HP knew what HP knows, we would be 3 times more productive. Can't we all say that? I know I could say that. I know without a doubt, if Journey Team acted on the knowledge that's floating around this building and in the brains of our people, and we could just get to it more effectively, dude, the possibilities of what we could do would just be amazing. But that's not the reality, right? The reality of it is our organizations have a huge depth of knowledge, but it's scattered. It's covered up with noise, with a bunch of non-relevant data and all this other stuff. And we're ineffective because of our inability to get to that knowledge.
Yeah, so you're talking about information architecture, right? So it's packaged properly so we can consume it and make better decisions from it.
Exactly. And ironically enough, right, who's the consumer of that structure of knowledge or information? People. So this is a human thing, right? This isn't like, well, Kipp, I indexed the database and I aligned everything. Well, no. Humans don't work that way, right? What's my relationship with knowledge, right? How do I find it based upon the context by which I see my job and the personas and the roles that I play in our organization? And that's the conversation of, we just don't roll out, let's say, Microsoft Teams and SharePoint and document management solutions and go, well, just search and find it, right? It's not that easy, right? And there's some design around it, human design around it, that will allow employees to be more effective.
So in your mind, what causes that data to either fall apart or never fall together? What is it that causes that?
Probably a lack of discipline, or intentionality. I mean, I'll give you an example, at least in our ecosystem, right? And then this happens all the time. So like anybody that's on Microsoft's cloud, Microsoft 365, they'll all relate to this really easily, right? There's a tool in there called Microsoft Teams. And so many of our clients will be like, oh, we signed up, we moved over to Microsoft 365, we're using Teams. But they weren't intentional with how they're using Teams. And so, a year later, they call us up and go, it's out of control, right? Like there's Teams everywhere. Someone joins the company, they don't know where to go for what data. There's 5 different teams that represent a single department, and what's the difference between one versus the other? And data is just everywhere. It's a lack of discipline and intentionality around the conversation. And I'm sure we had the same problem back in the day. I was sharing this example with someone on your team, earlier, like just the other day. It's like, Mike, you're old enough to know we used to use file servers. You remember those?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So anyone old enough, right? Back in the day, you would have a file server sitting in some crappy broom closet in your office, even though you shouldn't have done that. And I'm sure at first it was just a file server and a single mapped drive, and all the data was just there, right? And then we eventually like, hey, that's not really effective, guys, right? Like maybe we should organize the folders a little bit, right? And so we maybe put some structure to the folders. And then someone brought up this idea of like, well, a bunch of those folders I don't even need to see because I don't even have access to them. So let's map a drive, and maybe we'll grab the H drive and we'll map it to the HR folder. So when the HR person logs in, they only see their stuff. There's an idea. They don't see all this other stuff that they don't need to see, right? And then, we'll assign P letter to your personal drive, and that's Mike's personal cloud storage, or not cloud storage, file server storage. And then maybe we'll have a drive for the entire company to share, and we'll call that the S drive. That was a poor man's version of information architecture, right? And we got to that point through probably trial and error of like, man, this is not really effective. Let's start doing something. And then it's kind of interesting. All of a sudden, web technology comes, and And as you know, there's a lot of intentionality to empower our workforce, right? Back in the day, to get those drive mappings, who had to do that? IT had to do that through a group policy and all this other stuff. And then we get into the cloud, and Google and Microsoft are like, oh, if an employee needs the space, you just hit this button, they get it. How awesome is that? Well, it's awesome until they all do it. And now all of a sudden we have no idea where the data is, right? And so I think that sprawl has gotten bad enough that now organizations are like, okay, we should have had some intentionality and thought process around this, and really drove forward in a direction that's best for the organization all up. And the reason why, and it's out of ignorance, it's not like a mean-spirited thing, but the reality of it is, Michael, if we take knowledge and we put it in a pie, you know what you know, right? You know what you don't know, but there's a bunch of knowledge that you don't know it. And that's what our employees are doing all the time. They don't know that these other things are happening over here. So it's out of ignorance that we're sprawling, we're creating more collaborative spaces and knowledge and repositories, and not realizing we're creating more ineffectiveness within the organization.
Yeah, we're burying data in a bucket, and it's layered upon layered upon layered upon layered data, and like you say, it's not funneled appropriately, intentionally. There's no organization to it. So back to that architecture.
Yeah, totally.
So obviously, we in our our listenership is primarily in the construction space. I know that this is a huge problem for construction, but where else is this a challenge out there in the world today?
Everywhere. Seriously, it's a problem everywhere. This is, in fact, it's so much of a problem that we don't do. So my team, particularly in regards to collaboration, content management, we implement systems in the great. If I had to simplify it, right, and remove the technology, we implement systems to help our employees or help our clients implement systems that allow employees to get to the right data at the right time. That's all that we're doing. We don't do those projects, Mike, without information architecture, period. A client goes, oh, we want to migrate a bunch of data into SharePoint. Awesome. We don't know what we're migrating into unless there's a blueprint. Oh, well, can't you just throw it in one big thing? No, we can't. That's a bad idea. And let us tell you why, right? Because we don't want to just have this giant bucket, to use your analogy, and just plop everything in a bucket. That's not going to help us.
Well, that would be like somebody saying, I need you to build me a building without plans. It's like, what kind of building? What is it? 3 stories, 2, 1, need a blueprint, as you're saying. So how big is that problem? I mean, it sounds like Fortune 500 companies. I mean, everybody, right? I mean, is there a number you could throw at that?
Yeah, there was a report that was done probably about 5-10 years ago. So this is bigger than this, right? But Fortune 500 companies, this is a $31.5 billion annual cost related to poor knowledge sharing. I mean, and great. I mean, that should move some people, right? That's listening. They're like, oh man, that's a big problem. Forget about the number. Look at your current organization right now, and you tell me how effective it would be for you to be able to get to the data you need when you needed to do it, right? And I want to be really clear, and if you don't mind me sharing a story, because I think this illustrates it really well, right? And there's some humility in this. So since since you're trying to work into getting some humility into me, okay? So my wife and I, we just got married, and on our honeymoon, we went to a surf town to go surfing. Now her family's from Hawaii, right? So there's some just built-in genetics that proves that she can surf better than I can surf. Okay. Right. And I'm a white boy from central small town Utah. I get nervous anything deeper than an irrigation ditch. Okay. So you get this idea, here I am, let's go surfing. Now, what I didn't tell her is I was scared. I'm thinking the ocean, which I've only been in a handful of time, we're going to go out there where the giant monster waves are going to kill us, right? But I want to come across tough. We just got married. I'm not gonna expose my weaknesses too quickly into the marriage. So I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. we're getting ready. And after she explained sets, I mean, that's a whole other like I was trying to swim out and I couldn't swim out because I didn't understand what sets were doing and all this other stuff. But anyhow, at one point she goes, oh, I almost forgot. If you ever get disoriented in the water, like you're kind of underwater and you're not sure which way's up, reach down and grab the leash on your ankle and follow it up to the board. And first off, that scared me even more, right? Because I'm like, well, who's going to be disoriented? So, but nonetheless, she told me that, right? I get surfing, and within the hour, I just get eaten by a wave, and I'm underwater, and I'm swimming, and I'm starting to panic, and I'm swimming, and then all of a sudden, I remember what she said, and I reached around and grabbed my leash, and that leash took me the opposite direction that I was swimming, right? And I get on the board, grasp breath, and I go, my gosh, right? Like I could have died, if you didn't tell me that, really quick, let me not forget, right? And I'm like, man, that's really dangerous. Now, at the time, I didn't make this correlation. I made this correlation later. But that is the opposite example of corporate America. If that was most of our companies, that would have been in the employee handbook that under page 20, when you first got hired, and you would have glazed over it and never looked at it ever again. Or it would have been an email that gets blasted out to the entire company saying, hey, if you ever happen to go surfing and you get disoriented, do blah, blah, blah. And what would I have done in the moment when I see that email? Well, this is a waste of my time. I'm not surfing. So let me delete the email and forget about it. Or if I'm ambitious, I'd drag it over to a folder in Outlook or whatever and think I'm going to go read it sometime. And then I'd go surfing 6 months later and drown to death, right? That is corporate America's approach, right? We think we just throw knowledge on people because it's important, but the context is not important in the moment. So we can't rely on that type of communication and knowledge. We need them to go find it when they need it, not when you wanted to give it to them. Otherwise, we're not going to remember it. And anyone that knows like Bloom's taxonomy, or you look into learning organizations, that's not how humans work. We don't learn through data being thrown at us, and then we focus on being able to regurgitate it well enough for a test and then move on. No, you learn, meaning I have a context and I have a current scenario by which I need to address, and I'm researching and resolving a problem. It's knowledge in action, which means I need the knowledge when I'm in the action.
Right. Oh, wow. Such a profound story. I appreciate you sharing that. I think there's a lot of takeaways that we can take, not just in business, but in life generally, on that leash. I mean, I've been surfing and I know what it's like to be disoriented, and nobody told me to follow the leash up, right?
Yeah, well, I could have died on my honeymoon if it wasn't for just-in-time knowledge.
Wow, that's crazy. Well, and again, back to your point, you're talking about the practical application, which the word application infers action, which means I'm actually taking what I'm being fed and applying it now. So I now have experience and muscle memory. And again, I'm way more likely to remember that in a time of need if I've already practiced it.
You ready for this? Good old Instagram. Instagram provides two values for me. One, I get to see you run, right? and it motivates me to step up my game and get some action going. The second part is there is actually some valuable content, believe it or not, on the web. This morning, I saw this post and I thought profound, and ironically enough, related to what our conversation here. So Dale Carnegie, right? You know Dale Carnegie.
Oh, absolutely.
Quote, you cannot teach a man anything. You can only help him find it within himself. There's a big difference in logically understanding something well enough, and there's a whole other bag to getting it, right? And getting it requires that context that you're talking about, right? We can provide and support our people, but they will learn on their own, not because we taught them or threw data at them.
Yeah, I love that quote. It's exactly in line with what we're talking about here. It's needing access to the right information at the right time and knowing where to find it quickly, right?
Yeah, totally.
So do you, in your experience, I mean, you work with companies of probably all types of sizes, all types of industries. I mean, what's the low hanging fruit that somebody can take away and say, okay, my data is a mess. I don't know, we have this problem for sure. And most companies probably could answer the same way affirmatively. What is the first step in moving the right direction to getting control of that and moving in a better direction?
For sure. That's a great question. So the first comment I'm gonna make is get past the pitfall that tech is going to take your broken something and then magically fix it. It's not. Technology automates what is already there.
Ooh, I love that.
So if your data structure, if your knowledge is disoriented and it's a mess, yeah, we're going to automate that and just going to make it worse, right? You can't automate a broken process, right? And that goes the same thing for how we organize data and knowledge. Okay. Now, with that said, here's the baby steps or the first kind of things that I think everyone can take. First off, it's unique to your culture. Words have meaning, right? Show me color. Doesn't exist, right? It's a word that represents something, but it doesn't exist outside of the context of its own meaning. Organizations actually have the same dilemma. So, for instance, I'll give you a couple of distinctions. There's a big difference in a company that has an intranet, let's use the knowledge that sits inside a company's intranet, and the knowledge of a department. Those are two different segments of knowledge, and we actually treat them differently, right? If it's on the internet, what is it? It's corporate approved. It's kind of polished. It's published. It's for consumption from everybody. It's kind of like word of law or whatever, right? A document sitting in the HR document library that the HR team is working on is a draft document. And they might be working on, I don't know, employee policy number XYZ version 2. Meanwhile, everyone's consuming version 1 on the internet. This is work in progress. This is published content, right? Two different distinctions, right? Collaboration versus publishing, okay? Now, take that a step further, and here's the deal. You need to make that distinction. Employees don't know that, right? What happens when I go, you start muddying the water and I'm seeing a draft handbook versus the new policy versus the old policy, the work in progress. It's confusing, right? Make it simple for me to get to the data I need to do my job, right? So that distinction needs to be clear. The second distinction I'd say is not all collaboration is the same. There's a big difference between the collaboration of documents for, let's say, a finance and accounting department and the collaboration of a project team. And we in organizations even treat those things differently, right? Would we ever purge that finance and accounting site if inactive? No, right? Legal requirements, all kinds of problems, right? That project will eventually die. So what do we do to archive and decommission? We treat that data differently over time, right? So collaboration is not so simplistic as departments, right? Collaboration, think of collaboration. Let me give you some examples. Collaboration is committees, battle teams, communities of practice, social interest groups within your organization, a department, project teams, and we treat them differently. Use the context of your organization to organize and classify your data appropriately. And then I would lean, and it's kind of interesting because there's a dichotomy here, and some people might lose their stuff over this statement, right? And I get it. But some organizations will go a little bit more bootstrap, Mike, right? They'll be like, hey, we're open book policy, man. Everyone has access to everything and whatever. We're in the information age. Getting access to data is not the problem. The problem is noise, right? That's why eventually some of us that are high producers, what do we do with this thing? We start muting it. Why? Because it's a distraction. So don't get me wrong, there's security requirements, but sometimes I shouldn't have access to, let's say, that collaborative group over there, not because some authoritative position, I should be able to see that data and I shouldn't or what. No, it's about its noise. And it's not applicable to what I need to do. So because it's not, get it out of my radar. So it's not noise when I now search or when I go to collaborative spaces and I don't see things that are relevant to me. Give me the content relevant to what I need to do.
So segregate the data to appropriately serve that team, those people, where again, it's not noise, it is applicable, it is pertinent, it is imperative. And if it's not, move it the crap out of the way, right?
Totally. And stop using email as a form of giving knowledge to people. What a horrible idea. That is your analogy of a bucket. That's what it is. Your inbox is just a bucket of just random knowledge being dumped in there. The perfect example of this that I use all the time is if you were going to start at Journey Team and I gave you access to the company's intranet, if you can't from that site, if you can't go from there and actually get to the data you need to get your job done, we have failed. It shouldn't be hard. It shouldn't, like, I shouldn't get trained on how to get to data to do my job. That is not, like, that's a bad sign. So figure out, how do you organize it, right?
Well, the other side of that is as an organization, as a company. I'm a business owner. I know you have been also. I've failed as an owner if I have not prepared that information appropriately so that the lowest common denominator knows what to do, right? If they don't know what to do, then all I've done is strapped myself to now having to circle back and to go back through and maybe over communicate, right? Sometimes that extra double check actually causes more confusion and harm and delay than it would be to just trust people to take clear direction and move, right?
Oh man, you're singing my song, man. Like, just think about the power, so we can look at decentralized command, we can look at the power of communication, and most importantly, from a cultural perspective, the power of trust. Imagine when you are clear in desired intent and you empower your people to execute and they know how to get the job done. Then you don't need to micromanage things. But ironically enough, a system doesn't necessarily do that, right? It can support that, right? But you still have to be very clear in your communication in regards to what that looks like.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say, and I absolutely love this. Timing matters. Like the timing of how and when that data is communicated and to who is critical to make sure that again you don't inject new noise into a simple process, right?
Totally, totally.
I love that. So in your mind, when a company needs to uh, disperse this data or divide it up appropriately, how do they go about organizing that in a way that makes sense for them as a step one?
Yeah. So and I my fear is that people might be struggling what we're talking about, right? So let me try to simplify this really quick, okay? So let's first say, what is our distinction of collaboration? What does that mean? What does it mean to have a collaborative group? In the world, in Microsoft stack, and I would argue this is in every stack, okay? So this is not technology specific, but let's talk through this. In Microsoft stack, it looks like this, right? So if I have a department and we're a collaborative group, we have files, right? That we all have access to. We have access to notes for note taking. Okay. We do task management. We might have a task management tool that we all are collaborating, whether it be a project plan or Kanban board or, you know what I mean, a Gantt chart or whatever, right? But there's some form of task management associated to it. Our team has a calendar of events of what's going on from a scheduling perspective. Our team might even be part of an email distribution list, right? So we're part of a communication group as well. Then we have chat where we're communicating with chats and different. Then we have links to resources and links to other systems that we use. That is my definition of what I'd say is collaboration. And the more that I can be set up my environment when I join a team, right? So when I join, let's say, the finance team, I'm now part of all the collaborative tools that make up for finance. That is an ideal state. And I'm now part of that single group, and now we can increase onboarding, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So when I'm talking collaboration, that's now the lowest hanging fruit of this is just files, right? So if we want to talk about the simple version, what are we talking about? Access to resources and files to do my job. Maybe those are standard operating procedures, links to common systems and resources, templates in which I need to do my job effectively, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Despite what everyone thinks, despite the new generation, everyone thinks that all these the new generation are just searches for everything. That's actually still only counts about 40% of your workforce that will go to search first. So you still have to address the navigation to content, okay? And when you go search for something, where's the file? You still have to organize it. So organize it well, right? And then you address both needs, right? So the question then would be, if we go back to the poor man's version of knowledge management, and if I'm on a file server, or I'm using Google Drives, OneDrive, SharePoint, or whatever, Dropbox, whatever, break down the types of ways people collaborate into classifications, so that way you can treat those data repositories differently. So it may be as simple as, we have a classification of departments, and this is all their departmental data. We have a classification for committees and social groups or projects, and we classify them by the project ID. The point is, if you can't easily navigate from point A to point B to find the file you need, it's not right. And so do the necessary investigation, understand the language of your guys' organization, what logically makes sense. Now, this is not as big of a problem when you talk about file servers, to be frank. It's a big problem when we talk about, oh, I'm using Microsoft Teams, I'm chatting, I have files, I have task management, I have a team calendar, I have this, I have that, and you expect me to be effective in my job and not navigate all over the place to find what I need.
Yeah, I think, and I'm sure you can relate to this too. And in fact, it just happened to me today. I got a Slack message from one of our team members, and then I answered it. I answered it in a text on my phone, and then they responded in Slack to my text. Now I knew what was going on, and I needed a link, and it was easier to get to from my browser, and so that shows you both the power and also the double-edged side of the sword, with modern technology. At least it's cloud-based. So the Slack I can get to on my phone or my machine, doesn't matter which one, whatever. But like my text, like that's not integrated into Slack. And, so it's just an example of exactly what we're talking about. It's like, we've got to have a known process for keeping that data in those proper lanes, right? Those swim lanes. So we're not over the map, right?
And we will treat data differently based upon how we get to it, right? Like the analogy I use sometimes is like, if our employees got like a text message saying, hey, we got bought out, we're laying everyone off, we'd be like, aha, joke, emoji, whatever, right?
Right.
You switch that over to an email and everyone's like updating the resume, right? What's the difference? The medium, right? We treat it differently. So people have human behaviors that are different based upon how we consume content. And we need to be aware of that. And to your point, we kind of have to get the buy-in from the employees and then expect them to be empowered and have the discipline to use the right tooling for the right thing, right? And we want to discourage and promote certain ways of doing knowledge, because your Slack example is a perfect example of, well, this team uses Dropbox, this team's using Google, this team's using SharePoint, and this team's, holy crap, like, what's our process here, right? And we need to be consistent.
Yeah, and I mean, your example of the employee buy-in, that's the thing. I know, especially with our audience, I mean, they're dealing with, blue collar field workers in a lot of cases that they're trying to get to adopt these technology solutions. So, I mean, it's a whole other layer and a more of a challenge. They're not in an office environment. They're on a job site where air compressors are going off. Someone's jackhammering here. Someone's drilling there. They're pouring concrete. Like, who knows what environment they're necessarily going to be in. And so if they don't know how to get to and properly document or collect and share what it is that they're working on out there, you can forget about it. There's just no way.
Totally. Yeah. And if they're not bought in, they're not going to use it. And they'll bypass it, and they'll start texting, they'll start using whatever will work. Trust me, we will find a way to make it work.
Or whatever they're used to.
Doesn't do a good job. Yeah. and they'll use something they're used to, or they'll use something that's more effective.
From before the new
Yeah.
policy, right? So to your point, how critical, and I already know the answer, but I like to talk about this. How critical is buy-in from the top down and the messaging behind it, like that it has the full force and weight of the business owner and all the executives before these types of initiatives are pushed out to anybody.
Yeah, I think it's highly important. And I would suggest that it can't be superficial, because I do think that we do that sometimes, right? We're like, oh, we need executive buy-in, and that means that they'll sign the check for the budget, right? And that we call that executive buy-in, right? No, executive buy-in is when it's hard and they don't want to, and they do it because they're also committed to whatever it is that they're bought into, right? And they get it, they can emotionally get behind it, and and that's what I'm looking for, right? It's amazing. This is a fun conversation because we do this on our cultural side. Is when we do quarterly plans and reviews, the conversation I'm having with my employee is, are they fully committed and bought into what we're doing? And if they are, awesome. How do I keep you there? And if you're not, what's the blocker I need to eliminate to get your buy-in? We're not about manipulating people, and we need to stop doing this even from the technology side, right? We think, how's this? We treat employees sometimes like they're children. Now, this is the system, and you're just supposed to use it. And what's command and control? No, they're adults. If you can't, I'm going to steal this from Jocko, I think. If you can't passionately communicate why it's beneficial to them and convince them that it's beneficial, then it's probably not beneficial. So make sure it's beneficial and allow them to be adults and see the bigger picture of why you're doing what you're doing. And guess what? It's going to work. But it's going to take effort on your part to have that level of communication and buy-in.
Well, and I think this goes all the way into other parts of society, and I think to your point, you're saying if we treat them like children, and I think it's interesting the conversations that happen after the complaining of these guys are acting like children, or these people are acting like children, and it's like, yeah, well, maybe you're treating them that way, so they're responding appropriately, and you're actually the part, you're the problem.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you didn't communicate clearly enough so they could see the bigger vision and purpose behind what you're doing.
Well, and in any relationship, uh, people will tolerate what you allow, right? Like that they're going to, I mean, they're going to, it's, back to the Jocko stuff, discipline equals freedom. I mean, there's so many great things that the application of the SEALs teams has in business and in life and everything else. But it's like, we know, I know this, you know this in jujitsu, especially when you're getting ready to get choked out, you fall to the level of your training. And so we've got to get better training and help people have enough rope to fail once in a while so that we can teach them why they need to do it differently next time. So that when they're left to face this decision on their own again, and you're not there hovering over their shoulder, playing helicopter mom or dad or whatever, helicopter boss, that they will make the right decision and then in turn have more confidence. So the next time they'll lean into it and be able to hold their head high and probably make a good decision.
Yeah, and help the next employee that comes along that you now no longer have to help.
Which now equals a culture, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Absolutely love it. Yeah, this has been a really fun conversation. We need to have more. We need to have another one, and then I think we need to have a jujitsu one down the road too. But just to wrap up for today, I mean, what's the most important thing you hope that people take away from this initial conversation today?
Probably that don't accept the status quo. And I really feel like, I don't know, I'm getting a little bit on that tangent that we've kind of swung over into about empowering our people to make the right decisions, right? And I really feel like if we do the right thing, people will adopt and use the system. But we need to get their input, right? And we need to actually be intentional about what we're doing. And I think the key things, get past the downfall that, oh, we need to implement this technology and then it will all be fixed. No, we need to, if you can't organize knowledge and documents, you utilize in a file drawer in some office somewhere, you're not going to do any better job digitally. So address how you plan to organize content, be intentional about it, and then mirror the technology to what you need. And there's no reason that, and it's a big problem. So there's no reason why we shouldn't be addressing it. It's a soft problem, right? It doesn't show up on an invoice or on an accounting ledger. So it's one of those things that we have a tendency to kind of overlook a little too much and think like, oh, well, people just need to double down. It's like, how many inefficiencies exist because I'm doing the same thing that you already did and 20 other people did the same damn thing in another department and we're just not communicating.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, get your house in order before you go trying to make sure everybody else is all right.
Yeah, totally.
Beautiful. Well, very fun conversation. I appreciate the opportunity to sit down with you for a bit today. Looking forward to more of these, and just appreciate your friendship, mentorship, and also your wisdom sharing.
Yeah, it's great to have a conversation, man. I'm always up for a good talk. So
sounds good, brother. Well, we'll do it again, and we'll catch up later. Thank you for joining us today on the Mobile Workforce Podcast, sponsored by About Time Technologies and WorkMax. If you liked the conversation we had today, or were able to learn anything new or helpful, please make sure to follow us on our WorkMax page on LinkedIn and on Instagram at WorkMax_. And subscribe to the show on iTunes or your preferred podcast platform so you will never miss another insightful episode. Also, if you enjoyed the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating and review and share the show with your friends and colleagues. Your support means the world to us and will allow us to continue providing impactful information with others looking to improve their results in their business and, in turn, their life.